This is your Daily Dose with Dr. D. Here's Dr. Daniela Schreier.
So one of the many questions that people have, we all have, about the kidnapping of the three women in Cleveland, Amanda Berry, Gina DeJesus, and Michelle Knight, by the Castro brothers, Ariel, Pedro, and O'Neill, is besides the physical restraints, were there psychological bonds that kept them for over a decade? And many people find is it possible that they could have just been physically restrained for 10 years, or were they enslaved mentally, psychologically? Joining us right now to talk about, well, in essence, what we maybe colloquially call, inaccurately call the Stockholm Syndrome, but there was elements of this. Certainly, we saw this in Utah back a few years ago. So we'll talk now with Dr. Daniela Schreier. Dr. Daniela, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. I'm very well. Thanks for having me.
So what do you make of this? I mean, we don't know the details, so I don't want to project onto this case something that we have no reports of whatsoever. At this point, we know nothing about why the women were unable to get out until yesterday or the day before yesterday. But in general, what happens if, for instance, Elizabeth Smart in Utah a few years ago, when she was catched, she was 14 years old. She was held for 9 months. And at one point, she was actually sitting on a hillside looking at her own parents, calling her name. And yet she didn't make a run for it. And she was psychologically trapped as well as physically held.
But yeah, you have to understand, you want to talk about the Stockholm Syndrome, right? But that's not really even a diagnosis. It came up in Stockholm, as a matter of fact, Sweden, in the 70s, right after a bank robber had actually held hostages for over 6 days. They were freed, and after that, they kind of didn't want to let him or the victimizers go. They felt that they rescued their lives. And after that, a criminologist made a statement, and what he meant to say potentially was, we talk about sometimes trauma bonding, and this is kind of how this name came into being. But remember, according to FBI files, only a small percentage of victims, like or survivors, only 23%, come up with the symptoms of feeling empathy and loss after they leave the victimizer. Okay, so it's not very, very common.
No, we've seen some cases. For instance, Patty Hearst, famously in the 70s with the Symbionese Liberation Army, sort of became
English,
one of them.
In colloquial English, you often say, well, if you can't beat them, you join them. You know, even the case of Elizabeth Smart, immediately the younger these people are and the longer they are held, the more they are actually dominated by the victimizer, right? The first thing is mind control. You know, these women are taken away, and generally they are stripped of their identity. Clothing is taken off, everything. They can't refer to themselves with their name anymore. And the first thing very often is brutal rape in most of these cases. Most of the guys doing that also have histories of sexual abusing women. So yes, if you are in such an environment for a long time, the human mind, Doc, adapts to survival. And you will do automatically or unconsciously, right, what is needed to be in the place and to survive.
We're talking with Dr. Daniela Schreier. Dr. Daniela, what is recovery like from an experience? I mean, obviously, this is not an experience that many people have. I mean, I guess the closest thing on a mass scale would be POWs or maybe even just prisoners in general getting out of jail. But for somebody who is kidnapped at a young age, like J.C. Dugard, what kind of a recovery process do they have to go through to maintain some or establish some kind of a normal existence?
Well, it's very long and painful. You can forgive maybe over time, but you can never forget. See, there's a couple of things that they have to overcome. It's not a one-time rape, for example, which is horrible in itself, but it's, for example, 10 or 18 or 24 years of your life that have been stolen away. These ladies were very young when they were taken, 11 or 14 or 16. Remember, a decade is a long time. If you are all of a sudden freed, you return to a reality that you have even denied or didn't know anymore that existed. You have to work on alienation from your family, at times feelings of anger and even hatred towards society, people might have heard something. They might not have always called because good people are seldom suspicious. Who thinks there's a dungeon next to you there with some sex slaves? No one thinks about that. They have also to work through the rape trauma, to the repeated sexual abuse. In the case of Amanda Berry now, see, there is a 6-year-old girl that is supposedly her daughter. That's a product of the victimizer, and so the girl probably has also developed attachments. She knows him maybe as a father figure. For the 3 women now in Ohio, I believe, and we don't know yet, but they survived also because it was 3 of them. There must have been a close bonding.
Yeah,
now they are separated.
Right, and that's going to be a big adjustment as well. Dr. Daniela, thanks so much. We appreciate it. Dr. Daniela.
This has been your Daily Dose with Dr. D. For more, go to doctordaniela.com. That's doctordaniela.com.